The moon brings perspective. God is so big. We are so small. He's there, even when I can't see him. He's so close, even when I feel he's far. I wonder, is God's love limitless? Can he hear my prayer? Does he love me?
We're in the third week of our current message series, all about abundance. Abundance is a profusion of wealth, of plenty, of affluence. From its definition and from all our experience of it, abundance is much sought after and often elusive. So it's somewhat unexpected when Jesus promised at one point, "I have come that you might have life and have it in abundance." Jesus came that we might have an abundant life. And as rare as abundance is, it turns out that's exactly what we want too. It's what we want, it's what we all want, and it's what God wants to give us. As we read through the Gospels over and over again, we see evidence of that. Nothing could be clearer. From the profusion of wine at the wedding at Cana to the feeding of the 5,000. But he also brought abundance in myriad other ways besides, especially when it came to grace and truth. Abundance, it's what we want. It's what God wants to give us. Our role is to work with him to receive it. But to do that is not always easy because we have to learn to think differently. To think differently. We need to learn to think with an abundance mentality rather than a scarcity mentality. In scarcity thinking, I consider myself as living in a closed system in which there are only limited and always insufficient resources. There's only so much to be had. And so I need to grab what I can while I can and then hold on to it as tightly as I can for as long as I can. We can be sure that we've fallen into a scarcity mentality when we become focused on what we don't have and jealous of what others do have. A scarcity mentality fails to recognize the reality of grace. On the other hand, an abundance mentality begins and ends with grace. We know we're living in an abundance mentality when we're grateful for what God has given us, and we're joyful for what God has given others. With an abundance mentality, we give, we serve, we share easily, generously, cheerfully. Last week, we looked at having an abundance mentality when it comes to prayer. In the Bible, in the book of Hebrews, we read, "Let us confidently approach the throne of grace." Abundance, when it comes to prayer, means we confidently approach God, and we do so in and through Jesus Christ, expecting God to listen, expecting God to answer. This week, we're going a little deeper in that same topic, what it means to have an abundance mentality when it comes to prayer. And we're going to do that by wrestling with a question that is so simple that it seems inconsequential, and at the same time, so consequential that we often don't have an answer for it. To find this question, we find this question in a significant episode from the life of Jesus in the Gospel of Mark, and it goes like this. As Jesus was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a sizable crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind man, the son of Timaeus, sat by the roadside begging. Jericho, even 2,000 years ago, was considered an ancient city. Archaeologists have unearthed the remains of settlements dating back to 8,000 BC. The city is located 15 miles northeast of Jerusalem. In the Old Testament, Jericho is most famous for being the Israelites' first conquest in the Promised Land. Perhaps you remember the story of Joshua and the walls of Jericho tumbling down. As Jesus was leaving Jericho on the way to Jerusalem, where he would suffer and die, a sizable crowd was following him. Did you know that Jesus always had crowds around him? People were attracted to him. They wanted to be with him. Even people who were nothing like him liked him. Meanwhile, blind Bartimaeus sits by the side of the road begging for money. As a blind man, in that culture, at that time, he had no other options to provide for himself. But on hearing that it was Jesus of Nazareth, whose fame preceded him, Bartimaeus recognizes an opportunity. So he began to cry out, "Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me." That title, Son of David, is applied to Jesus from the very beginning of the Gospels. It's the very first thing the Gospels tell us about Jesus. In the very first verse of the first chapter of the first book of the four Gospels, we read, "This is the record of Jesus Christ, the Son of David." What does that mean, Son of David? Well, it was the premier title of the anointed one of God, the Messiah. Jesus is the long-awaited, the promised Messiah, heir to the throne of Israel's greatest king, King David. Bartimaeus recognizes Jesus for who he really is. In that sense, Bartimaeus, blind as he was, sees something others didn't see. He cries out for Jesus, but to no apparent effect, so he continued to cry out. Reminder of the importance of persistence in prayer. And the Gospel of Mark tells us many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. This is a basic reality of life. There will be voices in life that distract us, that dissuade us, that dispirit us. Some of those voices will come from within inside ourselves, our fallen human nature telling us negative things about ourselves. And some of those voices will come outside of ourselves, from the people in the world around us, distracting us, dissuading us, dispiriting us, especially when it comes to pursuing the abundant life that God wants us to have. When that happens, and it will, think of Bartimaeus and what he did. He kept calling out, and he kept calling out, and he kept calling out. He was undeterred because he knew that there was more to life, there was more to his life than sitting by the side of the road as the crowd passed him by. And he knows Jesus the Messiah is the key to more. So he kept calling out all the more because persistence in prayer works. Take a look. Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take courage, get up. Jesus is calling you." The very people who were discouraging him moments before now become his cheerleaders. Such is often the fickle nature of a crowd. They say, "Take courage." Courage is an attitude or ability that we take on. We don't have it, we take it. To have courage requires taking courage. What do we take courage from? We take courage from prayer. We can take courage anytime and all the time because Jesus Christ is calling us to himself. Take courage in prayer. Bartimaeus takes courage, and look what happens. He threw aside his cloak, sprang up, and came to Jesus. Such a clear image that Mark paints for us. He threw aside his cloak. Think about that. He threw aside his cloak. The cloak would have been laid out before him. As a blind beggar, it was his only tool for raising money. Because as they passed by, people would throw coins onto the cloak, where Bartimaeus could easily find and retrieve them. In throwing aside his cloak, he takes a triple risk. He loses all the coins he's collected that day. He loses the very means of his livelihood moving forward. And he loses a basic outer garment that served multiple practical purposes each day and was basically his bedding at night. Throwing aside his cloak was an act of faith. It was a total act of faith. And here we come to that question that's so simple and so difficult to answer. Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" It's a simple question that can be completely disarming. And maybe it was obvious with Bartimaeus' case, and we'll get to that in a moment. But how would you answer that question? The one who reigns forever, the one who sits at the right hand of the Father, the Lord of heaven and earth, asks you right now in this moment, what do you want me to do for you? How do you answer? Perhaps some things easily come to mind. I wish I had a new car. I wish my kids would just get along. I wish I felt better this morning. But they're just wishes springing from immediate felt need. What do you really want Jesus to do for you in your heart? He's calling forth the deepest desire of your heart. What is it? So that the clearer you can get on your answer to that question, the more powerful and effective your prayer can become. Just like in human relationships, the clearer you are on what you want, usually the better things go for you. The clearer you are on a job description for an employee, mutual expectations with your spouse, ground rules for your kids, the more successful will be the outcomes you can expect. Same for prayer. You got to tell them. Look at Bartimaeus' answer to that question. Master, I want to see. Now, as I said, at one level, that was the obvious answer. Of course, his biggest issue was his blindness. But on another level, in prayer, people often settle for less than their greatest need, less than the answer to their deepest problems. But we shouldn't. We're talking about prayer to the almighty ruler of absolutely everything. We've made the point before that nothing is too small to bring to God. But you know what? Nothing is too big either. Ask God for more. Pray, don't just pray, I wish I had a new car. Pray, Master, I want the means to be able to successfully undertake the work you have given me to do each day. Give me the means to do it. Don't just pray, I wish my kids would get along sometimes. Pray, Master, I want my house to be filled with love and mutual respect among all our family members. Don't just pray, I wish I felt better. Pray, Master, I want you to completely restore my health, that I might serve you more effectively. Bartimaeus didn't focus on his immediate felt need, which would have been food, a prayer he had a reasonable shot of being answered. He prayed instead a great big audacious prayer, a prayer that sounded impossible, impossibly bold, a courageous prayer. He was courageous enough to cry out. He was courageous enough to keep crying out. He was courageous enough to throw aside his cloak. He was courageous enough to ask Jesus for nothing short of a changed life. And so Mark tells us, Jesus said to him, "Go your way, your faith has saved you." Immediately, he received his sight. His faith and commitment to trust in Jesus, his bold, persistent prayer, his courage are all prelude to an amazing miracle that turns out to be abundantly more than he even asked for. Because, and don't miss this, take a look, he received his sight and followed Jesus on his way. In other words, he became one of Jesus' disciples. What do you want Jesus to do for you? Let me suggest 2 action steps. In your quiet time this week, drill down into that question. We've put together a PDF to help you do that. It provides a step-by-step reflection guide. Just text the word abundance to 88877. And then spend some time this week working your way through that reflection. Second, after Mass today, our prayer teams will be available here in church, here at the foot of the altar, to pray with you, to pray for you, to pray over you. If you're joining us online, check out our prayer wall on our website, where we can also pray for you. Like Bartimaeus, Jesus can, and sometimes does, change and transform our lives with more, even abundantly more. But first, you got to ask.